Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Move, Crush, Count. I'm your host, Scott Joseph. Move, Crush, Count is proudly sponsored by J&L Marketing, a digital and direct marketing agency that helps you outsmart your competition so you don't have to outspend them. Visit jnlmarketing.com today so you can see how their innovative approach will help you move the crowd, crush the competition, and count the money. Today, we have a very special guest with us. He's the founder of Strategy Peak Sales and Marketing Advisors, a leading sales and marketing strategy firm. He's a 27-year veteran when it comes to sales and marketing. He's the author of the Amazon bestseller, The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell. I want you to please welcome Kurian Tharakan.
Scott, thanks for having me on your show. First one in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, nice. Well, this show's a first for a lot of people. Do you enjoy bourbon? Do you enjoy bourbon?
We have clients in. I've got one of my staff in Louisville. I've got clients in Louisville, and they all drink bourbon. They also visit the races, right? So we know all about what goes on down in Louisville.
Well, we got a big race coming up here soon. So the Derby's here in a couple of weeks. Yeah. By the time this podcast ends, it'll be after Derby. But right now we're shooting live, we're streaming live, and just for the audience that's out there and for the podcasters, we may have some questions come in from our live audience. We welcome that, and you can go straight and ask Kurian anything you want in this show. But he is an expert at helping companies and leaders unlock their full potential through effective storytelling. And I'm excited about this interview because we haven't done a lot of shows as it relates to storytelling, and I know how important it is. So I'm excited to not only help the audience learn, but I want to learn myself. So he's going to share his insights with us, more specifically how to use these stories to inspire our own teams as well. So we appreciate that. So get your notepads out, take some notes, and or keep going back to this video because it'll keep replaying on all our social networks. So we're coming to you live right now on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So if any of those and by the way, if you have a comment, we don't get all the comments that come in. We use StreamYard to do this. Not every network shows the comments. Enter them anyways. Kurian or I can go back and answer any questions we don't give live on air. So if you're ready, let's dive in. Is that all right with you?
Let's dive in.
All right. Tell me a little bit. I'm curious. I've got a similar background in terms of sales and marketing. What got you interested in those two?
A complete accident.
Careers?
It's a complete accident. Right out of going into high school, I thought I was going to be a lawyer in university, right? But in university, I ended up going into business. In business, I thought I was going to go into computers. That's an application to business. And somehow I ended up in sales. And I thought sales was the be-all, end-all. You master sales and everything else will snap together. And then I quickly realized without the marketing set, and I use a volleyball analogy, with marketing, the perfect set, sales is a nice, easy spike. Bad set, really tough to spike. Barely gets over the net, right? So the more perfect you can make that set, marketing, the easier it was to score a point. And so I jumped ship, went to the other side of the fence, went to marketing. And, I've run sales teams, I've run marketing teams, I've run integrated sales and marketing teams. And if the marketing's not working, the sales is a tough, tough gig. And we all recognize that.
You know what? That is so funny you say this because we had a similar path here. And so when I started this company, my whole focus was, in my knowledge at the time, was sales. And I used to tell people back in those early 90s, we were a marketing company, or we were a sales company disguised as a marketing company. And what you quickly realize is they're both very important. But if I had to choose one, especially today, which is most important, it would be the marketing. Do you agree? What do you
me too. Absolutely correct. Right. The more potent your marketing, the easier it is to sell. And I currently still run a sales team for my marketing company. I have a sales team for my marketing company. And, one of the things I tell sales guys is that, your job is not to persuade. Marketing's job is to persuade. And sales, it only comes down to three basic things here: is to maximize the potential of the immediate sale that's in front of you, minimize the time to close, and close. Okay. Persuasion is not part of it. If you have to persuade that prospect during that time you have with them, that means marketing has not done its job.
Well, and not only that, but let's just take it on the sales thing for a second here. You bring up, I can't stand when, listen, I know that part of sales is understanding how to close. But to your point, if you are pushing hard and having to persuade hard at the end during the close, marketing did not do its job enough to interested. But let's take that out of the equation. In your sales process, you did not do your job, because you should be able to eliminate objections, pre-frame, deframe, reframe, whatever it might be, but understanding their true wants and needs, and more importantly, why, right, up front. So the close should be the easiest part of the deal.
If it's a properly qualified prospect, right, which is a part of the marketing angle. But, in the sales process, I completely agree with you. Your job is to compel as much energy in the propellant, right? Propel that prospect forward, and to reduce as much friction that they will encounter. And if both those things are correct, and if you have a properly qualified prospect, the sale should just happen. It's natural. Yeah. It's a natural close.
Correct. I always told our people, I like this. You might be the first sales and marketing expert I've had on here, believe it or not. This could be a great conversation, I think. Okay. So I always tell our people way back in the day, and this is going to sound horrible at first, but I promise you I'll bring it back to where it doesn't. I used to tell them, I want you high pressure salespeople. And what I meant by that is, I said, that does not mean that I want you applying such external pressure to try and close deals. I want you so good at finding out what they need and why, and showing them the solutions that you have created so much internal pressure within them that they just want to, it's almost like they're asking you to close.
Yeah. Again, we're talking from the same hymn book here, right? So the ability to remove obstacles and add propellant so that they get as excited as you are. And what I tell my people as a whole, whether they're in the sales team, the marketing, customer service, whatever it is that we are in the energy transfer business. And so if you are morose and, very quiet, right, that your prospect is going to be the same thing. We want them to have the confidence and the enthusiasm that you yourself have for our products and services. And one of the clearest things that I will do with our people is share with them all the customer wins that we have. And my closing line is, after sharing coaching call win after win after win, is our product works, our services work, our team works. What we do works, what we do works, what we do works. And have great confidence that when you are in that sales call, that the products that you're representing actually do their job.
Yeah. So you have an Amazon best-selling book, The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell, right?
I do. Yes, I do.
All right. Talk to us a little bit about that book. Like, what are those stories and why are they so important to leaders?
So these 7 stories, so I published this book a couple of years ago. And the 7 stories, it took me a couple of years to write the book. And in the research, tons of research that I did, I discovered that, the absolute best marketers out there. And in fact, I stole this from one of Apple's first marketing consultants, a fellow by the name of Regis McKenna. And Regis would say that the great marketing takes its cues from great religion. So great marketing takes its cues from great religion. And there have been thousands of religions in the last 15,000 years of modern human history, right? Written human history is only 5,000 years old, but, we can probably trace back civilization, where we came together in one place, grew crops, put up institutions like a religion or, a temple of some kind, those kinds of things, and gathered together in a societal type of contract. And that's maybe 13,000, 15,000 years old, something like that. And during all that time, there's been thousands of religions. Now, there's 3 dominant religions today, that are absolute dominant, and that would be Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Now, the surprising part is that Christianity is about 2.1, 2.2 billion people now. Islam is about 1.8, 1.9 billion, but they both sprouted from Judaism. And Judaism has only 15 million Jews in the world today that identify. 15 million, not very many at all.
Yeah.
But these are Abrahamic religions now. And yes, there's Hinduism as well and Buddhist and all that kind of stuff. But they revolve around one great thing that they do to market themselves. And that is tell phenomenal stories. Absolutely phenomenal stories to get people in the tent, to keep people in the tent, and get them to get other people to come into the tent. And that's what happens. And that's why these religions have been so powerfully dominant.
And let's be clear, they're true. They're truthful stories. So we don't want people out there thinking we're saying that all religions is just telling stories or anything like that. But they're truthful, which is important for your own story, right? You got to have truthful, authentic stuff.
Yeah, and the stories by themselves, okay, is not about truth or lies or anything like that. It's about a structure to impart information of some kind, right? So, con artists tell stories as well. And so does your mom and dad. And, mom and dad theoretically have your best interests at heart. The con man doesn't.
Yeah, I want to get into the structure in a little bit, but before we do that, talk to us a little bit how leaders can use storytelling to motivate their teams, especially during challenging times, which could be coming for a lot of business owners.
Yeah, and in fact, during the research, and I discovered 7 primal stories that every charismatic leader has used in one way or another. They haven't used all 7 in a single telling at all, but they will use them as they are appropriate, as they are strategic, because they all form a part of a strategic narrative. Now, what a strategic narrative is it tells people who you are, what you're all about, what's going on, who do we fight for or fight against, where we're going, and what's going to happen when we get there. Now, Moses, when he led the Israelites out of Egypt, he promised them the land of milk and honey, right? And that was a critical story that he would tell as part of his strategic narrative. And, 40 years of wandering around the desert may leave people a little lost. So they needed a vision of a future that they could get to. So these 7 stories are part of a primal set that all charismatic leaders tell. And in fact, even if you are leading that Boy Scout troop, okay, or just your family on this idea where you're going to go on vacation, you will tell a portion or all 7 of the stories as a natural result of anything you do that's persuasive.
That's a good point. What are some common mistakes do you see leaders out there making when it comes to storytelling? How do they avoid them?
The number one mistake, okay, they don't tell stories.
Yeah.
That is the number one mistake, that they either don't or refuse to tell stories as part of it. And it's just part of this idea of come to work, be an accountant, be a lawyer, be an engineer, whatever it is that you're doing, and there's no need to actually tell them anything more than that. But when you infuse your culture, and in fact, the first half of the book is all about culture. When you infuse that culture with these stories, the whole place comes alive. Yeah. The whole place comes alive. There's a great quote by an American theologian, and I'll have his name for you shortly. It'll come to me, right? But what he said, Howard Thurman, American theologian, okay? And what he said is counseling young people, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. And that's the same thing with your own organizations, your own companies, that Boy Scout troop. It's the same kind of thing. You want the energy to infuse in them, and it comes from them here out, not you shoving it down their throat. How do you do that? With strategic storytelling.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point here, because if any leaders are in the audience, or you manage a team, whatever it might be, I want you to think of the difference. And listen, when you're a business owner, right, you get bombarded with, you just want to get straight to the point. I need you to do this, this, and this. Here's why. Right. You don't get into a lot of, because you're like, you just got to be direct, because you got a million people coming to you, all these different, everything's a fire course to everybody. And you're dealing with a lot of stuff. So time is critical to you. And I think we lose sight sometimes of the importance, because if I'm hearing you right, the storytelling, it's almost, if I can remember back when I did things well and I involved stories versus pressed for time and I was quick and and maybe not as good. And let's just say I had a certain element of my product that I was selling, and I would go into explaining to why that was important to someone in the history of how it came about. Here was the story about why we developed this and then how it helped people versus, hey, I need you to make sure that on this date you do this, this, and this. There's a big difference there between the buy-in.
Yeah, the big difference is getting something done or getting something done with purpose, passion, energy. Right. And what would you rather have your people doing? And so when that self-volition comes from here, then what's up here gets completely sharpened in a whole different way. And what the results are completely different as a result.
That's great stuff. All right. So share some examples. And I want to get into the structure in a second here, but give us some examples of companies or leaders who have used storytelling effectively, right, to help them get to whatever goal they might have had.
Well, in fact, if you take a look at any great company that you admire, you will find the stories embedded within their folklore, within their marketing materials, within their overall myth. So we have several mythical companies in the world today. You can go to Nike, you can go to Tesla, modern-wise, Apple mid-range. And there's so many different aspects of it because all of them recognize this one thing: the way we understand our world is through the stories we tell ourselves about it. That's the only way we do it. And there's a whole, you can look this up on Wikipedia. It's a whole thing called narrative identity. And so the identity, we are constantly assessing the inputs that are coming at us, visual, hearing, taste, whatever it is. What does this mean? And you compare it against your own identity framework, who you are, what you're all about, where you are going as a person. And then when you infuse these two things, either that input makes sense or it completely doesn't make sense and you reject it. Right. And so that's why, in the US today, we've got, two very polarizing parties. You got the Democrats and the Republicans. Doesn't matter what side you're on. You take a look at the same set of inputs. You can talk about, solar energy. You can talk about solar energy, right? And it's the exact same set of facts. It can be the same white paper out of a respected university. The Democrats will say this and the Republicans will say that, taking completely different points of view. And rarely will they agree on it. So solar energy is a job killer. Is it? I don't know. The other argument is solar energy is going to create so many jobs that it is going to completely, take the energy business and transform it into a renewable structure. And so, and so if the Democrats are saying that, the Republican argument, if you want to get them on the side, would be, and that's how we achieve energy independence, which is sort of a conservative value, right? So now all these different types of the meaning is imparted by the story. So, Nike, for example, way back when, there's a great story about Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, and he was addressing an auditorium of people. This is way back in the early days of Nike. And I'm going to paraphrase this just a little, right? But
this story is perfect timing with the movie coming out, by the way.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So I'm looking forward to that movie. So he's telling the story in the auditorium. Again, how many people here run? And so a whole bunch of people put up their hands. Okay. How many people here run every day? And a few more, a bunch of hands go down. How many people here run every day, rain or shine? Okay. And a few more hands go down, right? And there's just a few smattering hands left over. And finally ask, how many people would run every day no matter what happened? No matter what, it was raining, sun shining, no matter what was going on, you have to go out and run. And there's just a few hands left in the audience, right? Up, up, up. And he says, that's who we make our products for. That's the whole purpose behind Just Do It. We make our products for you. And it's the subset of a subset of a subset. And that is the whole archetype that they geared every other story around. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. It doesn't reward the winners. It rewards the people that just do it. There's an example.
Well, that's a great example. And if you think about it, I'm listening to that and I'm also thinking, all right, I'm not one of these people that run every day, right? But I am the type of person that once in case I did want to, I want to make sure I've got the best equipment I could, right? I want to make sure. And so if those people use
Exactly
it,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly
I
right.
love
You know,
that.
and then on it goes. You know, uh, Apple had a whole series of commercials in the early 2000s. You know, you have the dorky PC guy, and you have the cool yet casual Mac, right? And they're always,
Yeah.
you know, they're always going. Not the PC guy's always trying to compete with the cool Mac guy, right?
Yeah.
But those are all independent little snippets of stories. Right?
Yeah.
Because that's how we communicate the essence of our brand, the essence of our purpose and mission.
All right. So talk to us about how the leaders in our audience can use storytelling to help their personal brand, you know, and why is that important for them?
The personal aspects of it, you know, there's a real aspect to understanding the morality of why somebody does something. Okay, so and morality is neither good or bad or whatever it is. It's simply you understand what the values are behind this person. So you can have a commercial reason to do something. Let's say we're talking about business leaders, right? You have a commercial reason. We're going to sell this product to this market. Why are we doing that? To go out and, you know, eventually it might be just make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right, which is a different set of moral values than to say we're going to do this to reduce the carbon footprint of this industry by 72% within 5 years. Because unless we do that now, there won't be a planet for us to really revel in afterwards. So that's a different set of moral values that people aspire to. So when you tell the stories about carbon footprint versus making a lot of money, both of those can be in the same product, right? But how people now gravitate to you and give you the best part of themselves, which is not their body at their desk, but their heart, mind, and soul, is going to be judged on that gift of their heart, mind, and soul, on the story that you tell about yourself. Who's the leader I am entrusting with the energy of my heart, mind, and soul?
Great point. All right, now let's talk about how you can help our audience, the MCC Nation. How do we create these powerful? What are some tips we can do so the stories we do tell are powerful?
Well, the first thing you have to look at is, you know, what's the framework for the stories? And it's a 7-story framework. I'm going to quickly go through them, if that's okay. And I'll give you what those 7 stories are. So, you know, and you'll recognize this because
Kurian, listen, you'll never hear me stop you. Never hear me stop you for giving us specific things that we can integrate now.
Well, we go back and, you know, what I realized is these stories were primal. They are absolutely necessary for society to glue together, let alone families and individuals or part of organizations, right? Unless you understood these 7 stories in a way, your connection to other people, to your institutions, to your companies are very, very frail. But the more powerful these stories are, you have a purpose beyond the paycheck. So the 7 stories are: 1, creation or origin. How did this start? Okay, what was the inciting incident? You know, what was the absolute beginning of the beginning? And what are the dangers that you faced in this embryonic state to get it to something that you could actually birth?
Why is that important?
Because these stories are primal. And they are primal in the sense that if they are missing, your customer, let alone your people's minds, actively go searching for it. You know, how did this start is going to be one of those things in the back of everybody's head. It is one of these psychological things, the primal nature of it, that you have to fill. Otherwise, there's a void. And your psychological mind, okay, hates a void. It has to be filled in.
If you look at let's just take the movie industry for a second. If you take the franchise Marvel, right? So that's the easiest, most recent successful model out there. Their best films, their best movies are the origin stories.
Oh, exactly. Absolutely correct. You know, in fact, that's the first story they always start, whether it's Spider-Man or Batman or anything like that. You start with the origin story. What created this amazing drive? You know, Peter Parker just wanted to make a lot of money until his Uncle Ben was killed by the robber that he let go.
Yeah.
Right. And that was the whole angst for how he started on his path. So that creation story is a very, very powerful story. And if you don't tell that story, people will make up the story. And here's a real simple one. Okay, you know that company over there? Okay. Do you know how it starts? How it started? No. Drug money. I don't know if that's true.
Right.
But if you don't fill that void, you have all sorts of bad actors that could fill in the void for you with stories you don't want them telling. That's the whole point of why you tell these 7 primal stories. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, listen, if you're not, I was A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez, after he retired, baseball player for the Yankees and the Mariners, Hall of Famer.
Yep.
But he had trouble with the steroid stuff.
Sure.
Where he got suspended for that year. He said he started coming out and once he retired, started getting more active and vocal and putting himself out there. He said because he was not going to allow other people to tell his story. He had to take control of that and make sure his story was put out there in the manner that he wanted it, right?
Yeah. Control the narrative. If you don't control the narrative, because these stories are primal, okay, that void will be filled by all sorts of things that you may not want it to be.
Yeah. No, good point. All right. So what was the second? Yeah.
Story 2, our identity, values, and beliefs. Who are we as people? What are the highest values that we aspire to? What must we always hold sacred? What must we never violate? And there's a whole bunch of different aspects to that. But those values now, we go back to that original story that it's all about making money, or is it all about saving the planet? And we'll make some money along the way as well. And those values are very different, okay? Same company. And what's surprising is the same company, same product. If you have 2 separate leaders, they can drive the value set this way or the value set that way. And the identity of that company becomes very, very different. There's a great cover of the 1983 Fortune 500 magazine cover, Fortune magazine cover. And I'm getting this a little wrong, but it's General Motors vehicles. And, it's the Cadillac. There's another GM car, et cetera, et cetera. And they all looked alike. This is a 1983. They all looked alike because in the 70s, the theory was this, at the beginning in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, back in the early 1900s, there was over 2,000 car companies that were about, from very small to getting larger, et cetera. And eventually they consolidated down to about 5 big conglomerates, AMC, Chrysler, Ford was there. General Motors was there as well. And so General Motors, all these companies were driven by engineers and designers in the beginning. People loved cars and knew they wanted to build something great. But what happened is, in the 60s and 70s, General Motors quickly realized that its most profitable division was the finance division, GMAC. And so there's a very palpable sense in that culture at that time that the engineers and the designers moved out of the central offices on the GM campus, and came in the MBAs and the finance quants, right? And so those people were running GM. And what resulted was the 1983 Fortune cover where all these cars looked like the same thing, completely different divisions. And because they were no longer in the car business, they were in the finance business. It still sounds like GM, but it's not the GM of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. That's correct. Yeah. So
there's a lot. Listen, that story you tell, I come from the auto industry. I got to tell you, a lot of iconic brands were ruined because of that.
Yeah. And so leaders have a profound ability to divert the energy.
And what I mean by brands is the actual models. Certain models, iconic nameplates, just horrible brand image today, mainly because of that.
And it's these leaders have this amazing ability to divert the energies of its people and their markets into places that are based on their own individual identity, and they can destroy the corporate identity as a result, right? Or they can bolster the corporate identity as a result. Story 3, the big idea. And the big idea is simply, what's that central organizing principle or concept that we revolve everything else around? And if you go to Google, it's, at the very beginning, it was to organize the world's information, which was a pretty, big leap for a little Google out of Stanford, back in 1990, whatever it was. And yet they did it. They did it, right? Now they're facing some other new things coming out of Chat GPT and such, and Bing has co-opted the AI thing, and they're scrambling to catch up, et cetera, et cetera. But the big idea, what's the one central organizing principle or concept that everything else that we do revolves around? Story number 4. This is an important one, very important. They're all important, but this is very important. The enemy we face. Nothing organizes a people faster than showing them an enemy that we have to defeat. And an enemy doesn't have to be an individual. It doesn't have to be a country or anything like that. It can be a concept. It can be global warming. Okay, it can be, too many plastics in the ocean. It can be anything to either subdue, and eliminate, or that we either fight for or we fight against. We can fight for adult literacy. We can fight against childhood poverty. Absolutely, like depth of poverty, abject poverty type of thing, right? And those are different ways to outline that enemy we face concept. Story 5 is all about the mighty winds. And the mighty winds simply say this. In the environment that you have, your organization, whatever it is, let's say it's a business again, right? You have 6 mighty winds that are always buffeting your ship. And your ship is actually a sailing ship. It's not a powerboat, it's a sailing ship. It requires wind to buffet the sails, to billow its sails, right? And to give it power. And these 6 mighty winds are the macro forces: societal forces, technological, environmental, economic, political, and legislative forces. And they're always at play. And they create tsunamis of destruction in their path and tidal waves of opportunity. And it doesn't care. So you take a look at a very common example. In 1969, I think 4 universities got together and they hooked each other up electronically. And it was based on a grant from the Defense Initiative, DARPANET. They called it DARPANET as a slang, which eventually became the internet, 1969. But it didn't morph into something huge and colossal, even though it was lying there in wait, until 1994 with the World Wide Web. And in that path, it created absolute destruction. No one buys a typewriter anymore. I used to walk into rooms where you had, all sorts of IBM Selectrics going, bang, 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 bang. I cranked out my essays in university on a typewriter. Who buys a typewriter anymore? Because you can go to Google Docs now, and for free, you can get it proofed, you can do spell check, all this kind of stuff based on this little technological trend called the internet, which happened in 1969. And so all sorts of other examples. Legislative is a very powerful one. We used to have a company in town here in the early 90s, did a booming business in CD rentals. So compact discs, when you got your music in compact discs, he would rent it out. His store was called the CD rental store. He would rent out the compact disc, and you would probably take it home to listen to it. But you're probably ripping all the tracks off, right? And then you return it the next day, and you rented just like you would a video VHS from Blockbuster at that point. So he did a booming business on that, right? He did such a booming business, he opened up a second store in a city about 3 hours south of here. And that store, the grand opening, was just in time for the passage of NAFTA 1, the North American Free Trade Agreement between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, which immediately outlawed the rental of CDs, compact discs. And now, NAFTA wasn't negotiated overnight. It was negotiated for years, right? But in an instant, both the stores were wiped out.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because of now a legislative wind, which is also affected by the politics. So we have to be very cognizant of the winds, because it can either bring your sails to full billow and power you forward, or it can capsize a boat or refuse to power your boat at all.
Yeah.
Story 6, the journey we must undertake. Now, the first 5 stories are the left side of the equation. Okay. And if those stories are believable, if there's passion with those stories, and if they can attract people's attention, but especially if they're believable, then there's an equal sign and said, well, obviously this is the journey we must undertake. That makes perfect sense. Let's move this path forward. So if we say something like, we only have 10 years to save the blue whale, from extinction. Suddenly that is a polarizing story in the enemy we face, right? We face extinction, but obviously we need to do something to save the whale. It's obvious. Then you put out this structure of how to go about saving the whale. And that's the journey we must undertake. And finally, story number 7 is what we call a meta narrative. And a meta narrative is simply the first 6 stories all told together in one telling, shorter though, right? And that meta narrative also adds what we call keystone elements. And the keystone elements are things that guarantee the win. So it's a summary telling of the first 6 stories with keystones that guarantee the win. Here's the common keystones. God is with us. Superior people, superior technology, the right timing. All these kind of things. There's hundreds of keystones. And when you give the meta narrative with the keystones, you give the people the confidence to follow you into battle. And those are the 7 stories.
Very good. Thank you. Tell me, all right, so I'm telling these stories, all right? I'm following your structure you just did, the 7 different stories. I want to make sure they're good stories, right?
Yeah.
But how do I make sure they're authentic? To me, I'm being true to me when I'm telling them, right? As a leader.
Well, the authenticity, there's 2 parts to authenticity. And the first part is that you yourself believe it. Like, that you are, it is legitimate to your identity, that it is authentic to you.
Can't you just tell when someone, it's not anything they necessarily say. It's the congruency in how they deliver something. You can just tell when someone doesn't believe their own words.
Yeah, but a lot of politicians' careers have been made on exactly that kind of authentic inauthenticity.
Yeah.
Now,
exactly.
The second part of that is, so you yourself believe that absolute, this is the truth. This is the truth. The second part of that is now putting enough of the energy and the passion and the facts into those stories, so that people can verify, so that people that you are telling, the audience that is listening to that, think it's also believable. So that authenticity has to be believed, and then it has to be conveyed. And unless you have both those kind of things, it'll only just stay with you. So where do you start? You start with your own beliefs. Your beliefs, identity, values. You go through those 7 stories and you say, if somebody told me these stories today and I knew nothing about my business, I would want to know more, because now you've got my attention.
What role do you think empathy plays in storytelling? How do leaders cultivate empathy within themselves and, say, their teams?
The meaning of communication is response. That's an old line from the neuro-linguistic programming people. The meaning of communication is response. If you're not getting the right response, you have not communicated properly. And that's solely your responsibility. So unless you have empathy for the audience, your audience, what drives them, what creates value. Because what happens here is you've got your 7 stories. You got your 7 stories. Your audience also has their own 7 stories. And where those 7 stories intersect, is where value can be created. So unless you understand how that value can be created by intersecting those 2 frameworks, your 7 with the audience's 7, which requires empathy, then you're just going to be flailing around.
Have you seen any examples where people or companies maybe use storytelling to help build brand loyalty?
Sure. You can see a very clear example in the last few years. So you've got the Dove Real Beauty campaign. Have you seen this? The Dove Real Beauty campaign. And so
I can assure you that if I saw an ad, I wouldn't know which ad you're talking about right now, but I promise you, if I've seen the ad, yes, I have.
So the Dove Real Beauty campaign, I don't know exactly when it came out, but it's still going. And it's all about, we're not putting a whole bunch of absolutely stunning, skinny women, in all these commercials. We're going to feature real women. Okay. And this whole idea is this is real beauty. And there's all sorts of different little vignettes that they have done to build that side of the brand loyalty. One of the things that they did was that they opened this great commercial. It's actually a YouTube video, and what they've done is they take a open floor plate, like a warehouse type of floor plate, and they had a forensic sketch artist, a police forensic sketch artist, and they had two people meet each other, and they would have the lady that was the subject describe herself to the forensic sketch artist, who wouldn't see her. Okay, and he's an expert at what he does. And then they would take the person that met the lady and have them describe her. Okay, so see what's going on here. And inevitably, every single time, the way the lady described herself was always lesser than the way other people saw her. And that was the whole essence. One of the key aspects of that Real Beauty campaign is that, you are so much more vibrant and beautiful than you ever give yourself credit for.
That's a great story in itself. I'll tell you, one thing I'm enjoying about this interview is you're not just explaining the storytelling to us. The whole interview, you've been telling stories. And so, and I absolutely love, so you practice what you preach. And if anything else, somebody should be able to sit there and see the power in what you're doing here, because it draws us in to hear. I want to hear how that finishes, right? I want to hear where's this going. So I love that. So tell me a little bit about how companies have used it, not just to build brand loyalty, but how have they used it and I know that what you just said kind of crosses over into this question, but used it in specific marketing campaigns. So give us a different example.
Stories in specific marketing campaigns?
Yeah.
Every marketing campaign is a mini story.
Yeah.
When you watch a commercial, it's actually a 30-second story. That's what it was. Life Cereal, I think it's Life Cereal, is all about Mikey. And little Mikey and the two older brothers are sitting around a breakfast table. And, what is this? It's some cereal that's supposed to be good for you. I'm not going to try it. You try it. No, I'm not going to try it. Let's get Mikey to try it. He'll eat anything.
Yeah.
And, and he's put it over, and Mikey, little toddler in the high chair, starts digging in to, I think it's Life Cereal, right? It's a 30-second commercial. He likes it. What the two older boys say, he likes it. And that was the whole point. Cereal that's good for you. He likes it. Now, what they did about 20 years later, they brought back the three kids who are now young adults, right? And they reenact that story. And it was very cool to see this, in that story arc, 20 years later, and see these three, which are young adults now, reliving that original story that they told in commercial form for Life Cereal 20 years earlier.
God, I remember that commercial like it was yesterday. The original.
Right.
So that's how you know it's a good commercial.
So Scott, so the whole point is you don't remember the commercial. You remember the story.
Correct. Yeah.
All right.
That's a great point.
You remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only way we understand our worlds is through the stories we tell ourselves about it.
Let me ask you, in terms of like techniques, trends, when it comes to storytelling, do they change over the years?
They absolutely do. I've got.
So my question is, because I didn't know the answer to that. So, all right, if they're changing, what can the audience do to stay current, to know what the best ways to kind of tell these stories and to stay ahead of the curve with that? How do they keep up with that?
Well, I'm in the marketing business, so I subscribe to all sorts of newsletters. And more importantly, I pay attention. I pay attention to what's working. It's really simple to find out what's working. Like if you're going on to Twitter, you look for viral tweets and then you dissect them. You do a postmortem on the tweet and you say, why did this work? And what does it have in common with other viral tweets? And so when we take a look at the whole thing about storytelling always, go back to Aristotle's time. There's a beginning and there's a middle and there's an end. There's an inciting incident. Then you go into things like the monomyth or the hero's journey, which is very prominent in myth and which George Lucas used to develop his Star Wars saga, right? You know, the reluctant hero, you know, the call to action, you know, all these different types of things. And you have all these formats for telling a story. Then you have all the channels that you will format that story for. So you have structures of stories and then the formats thereafter. So now, you know, one of the big things is 9-second videos. Okay. The last thing you want to do is put up a 1 hour video on YouTube. You know, you have 9-second TikToks, you know, 15-second TikToks. And so because of the shortened attention span. And it's just to capture that immediate attention. And then if they want to know more, then there's more gradated involvement, right? So don't give them the whole enchilada at the beginning. Give them a little taste. And your whole fortunes have been made. You know, Mr. Beast is out there building content every single day. He is going to be a billionaire. You know,
well, he already is. If he wanted to sell today, I mean, he was just offered. I know it was at least a billion. Might have been a couple $1 billion. And then he turned it down and goes, no, this brand's worth 10 to 20 billion.
Yeah.
And I think David, I forget his last name, but it's horrible. But he did the math on it. And he said, you know, all right, let's look at his video. It gets this many views. It gets this many clicks. It does this and this. If you translate that to what a Super Bowl ad charges,
right?
He goes, and he goes, and that's almost just one. Yeah. So you saw the same thing. He goes, it's easily worth 10 to 20 billion dollars.
Yeah. I did see that analysis. Now that you bring it up, yeah.
I mean, think about that. That is an individual using social networks to build a brand, just the way you just explained it, at a value now at 10 to 20 billion dollars.
Yeah. Now, Scott, what did you just do there? You just told me a little story, okay, about the future of a company that was just offered $1 billion and why it was worth 20 billion. And then you backed it up with facts that gave me evidence for the structure of the rationale. You gave me a little story. Oh, that's why. It's worth 20 billion because of the number of eyeballs. And if you relate it back to a Super Bowl, which is a vintage format for advertising, it makes complete sense. Told me a little story. Yeah. Right?
It comes naturally to me, Kurian. It comes. Yeah, it doesn't. That one did.
You did it though, right? Because you did it because you know the story of how you would tell it. And you told that in 30 seconds. That's the whole point right there.
That's a good point.
And so, back up with that. And, you know, if you just told me facts, it wouldn't be as believable as if you embedded it in the story.
What metrics do we look at? What do we do to say, all right, you know what? I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to use it to build my personal brand. I'm going to use it to brand our company. I'm going to use it to in our marketing campaigns or efforts, right? What metrics do we look at to see, and how long does it take to see, all right, this is starting to work?
If it's a marketing campaign, we measure all sorts of different points on any client funnel. We don't just measure dollar output. Every point in that funnel, as they advance through the funnel, is a sale, right? And the first sale is, come look at this. The second sale is, come read this. The second, and it just keeps going like that. And only at the very, very bottom, and you're looking at the leakage at each stage of that funnel, right? And because when you see a lot of leakage, that means there's a problem in that story.
Yeah.
At that level in the funnel of that story. And it's only at the very end, when all those stories have been embedded, that the final decision, well, of course I'm going to buy. Okay, by the time you get there at the last portion of where somebody's being asked to make a decision to buy, you should have a very high conversion rate, a super high conversion rate, because at that last stage of the funnel, they've bought into 6 or 7 very potent stories.
And so we have a lot of salespeople in our audience, right? Sales managers, sales leaders. It's no different than the sales process, right?
It's not.
So if you're thinking about it, all right, now you were just talking about marketing, but the same thing when you're selling, right? First, I'm selling myself. If I'm not the type of person that they feel comfortable with, everything I say after that's going to go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
Right. I got to sell a company. I got to give some history. I'm not saying this is like an hour here, an hour there. This all happens very quickly, but throughout, and then there's different services and elements or benefits our product or service has, right? And so as you're selling, you're test closing along the way. Well,
you are.
If they're not buying along the way, you can get to the end, but they're not buying. You had a problem way up here. And I remember back when I was managing our sales teams, and I would always ask them questions when we didn't get deals done yet. And we had to do follow-up, like, all right, where'd we leave it? What's this? You could always tell exact same thing where the problem was in how we were presenting. You know, what wasn't sold, what wasn't convincing enough, or we didn't hammer home. We didn't have something that really addressed their wants, their needs, or what they're trying to get away from or move forward to.
Yeah.
But the exact same thing, you just back it up and say, all right, this is where the leak was. Right. So, yeah.
So there's I've been in sales for a lot of years. I've been in marketing for a lot of years. So I've got more than a couple of little sayings that I'll tell my teams, right? And one of the things is, the absolute first thing, the absolute very first thing that anybody buys from you is the story. And specifically, it's a transformation story with your customer as hero, which makes your products and services simply the tools to enable that transformation, which makes you the fairy godmother or the wise wizard that will grant that hero of the story a magic amulet, the magic sword, the lantern to enable the transformation, which are the products, right? So what is that transformation story? And so you have, if you're in the car sale business, you have a mom come up and looking at cars, and just because they're demographically similar, same income, same number of kids, all this kind of stuff, doesn't mean that they will have the same car in their driveway, because their identities may be very different. Demographics don't measure identity. Psychographics do, right? So what is that identity? And so the second thing that you'll hear me say quite a bit is that every product does only one of three things. Maybe do all three things, right? But it has to do at least one of three things. Every product or service that you buy, in fact, anything that you bring into your life, it could be a product, service, it could be a new spouse, it could be a home, it could be whatever it is, does only one of three things: supports, enhances, or repairs their sense of self-identity.
Yeah.
Okay. If it doesn't do that, if it destroys their self-identity, they're not buying it.
And by the way, that's everything you just said. It goes back to, you always hear the topic in sales, right? People buy for emotional reasons, and all those three things lead back to an emotional thing, right? That leads back to an emotional thing. We justify with logic, but we buy for the emotional reason.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about, imagine, and so I loved hearing all this. And so I'm sitting here imagining, whether it's marketing or sales, it doesn't matter, without any story involved, there's no emotion.
There's no emotion. Yeah.
It's just logical facts.
How can there be, right?
Right.
How can there be? You're the absolute best songs that are written out there. Obviously, they have to have a great melody. They have to get a great melody and great orchestration. The arrangements have to be great, right? And then you remember that part. But it's the lyrics that give it meaning. And I've heard great songs melodically that are destroyed by the lyrics. What the heck are these lyrics? I was listening to "Lying Eyes" by the Eagles. And, the background on that story, how Henley and Fry wrote that story, it's phenomenal. But you listen to the lyrics, and that gives the song all that meaning. Another one, a phenomenal one, it's called "Already Gone" by the Eagles again, right? And there's this classic line, and people will call me after I tell them this. You got to listen to this line from in the song, "Already Gone." And they'll call me, Kurian, what, months later, what was that line again? Because it is so poignant. And the line is this: so oftentimes it happens that we live our lives in chains and we never even know we have the key. And that blew me away when I heard that. And when I hear it sung, the meaning of that song just comes alive in my mind, heart, and soul.
But think about what you just said. All right. What did you just do? What got you so involved into these songs? It wasn't just the lyrics and everything you just mentioned, but you know the background story to them.
That too.
You're almost you're sitting here, and I think about, because I'm a big Springsteen fan, and so some of the things that makes him great in concert, it's not that he's running around on stage. He's telling a story as to why he wrote the song. So a lot of times he'll go into, he goes into these long stories in concerts as to, that he's considered this great storyteller. It's not just his lyrics and his songs. It's how he communicates and why he came up with it and how he does it. And if you watch any of his documentaries, his storytelling's phenomenal.
Yeah. It's phenomenal stuff, right? And the whole point with these 7 stories, they're primal, because in order to make sense of our world, we need these 7 stories installed in order to make sense of the world. Otherwise, we only have partial complex of stories, right? And these aren't, and there can be multiple creation stories, because, as companies grow, you have divisions start, and, you have people come and leave and things like that. Right. And so
different things, different services within a product, different, there's all kinds of origin stories.
Yeah. So stories are the only way we understand our world. But what happens is, as you grow, they form part of a story complex. And so you have stories that are next door to each other, that reinforce each other, that, borrow from each other. And you have to just go into the sacred texts of any religion to see this. And if you take a look at Christianity, you will see these stories do exactly that. So you have a set of stories that then co-opt and give energy to another set of stories. And they form a part of this overall complex. Right. And you go back to all 7 of these stories are in the Bible. They would be in the Quran. They would be in any major religion, because they're primal.
Yeah, this is good stuff. All right. So what advice would you give, or is there anything better? Let me ask this. Is there anything we haven't covered for someone that wants to get into this, into a better, either elevate their storytelling game or start incorporating it into everything they do? What advice would you give that we haven't covered?
You have to be deliberate about the stories that you tell. And that's probably one of the big mistakes that I see leaders make, is that they're not deliberate about engineering the story complex that they want their people to know, their markets to know. And instead, they just rely on happenstance. And because they rely on happenstance, the stories are often weaker than they need to be. I guarantee all those stories are present. And if you're not providing that creation story, someone's telling somebody else that your company started from drug money. Again, of course, I'm making that up. But you don't want that, do you? So you have to be deliberate about how those stories are communicated.
Great point. All right. Well, that concludes today's episode of Move, Crush, Count, where we explored the power of storytelling. This was a great interview. Storytelling, not only for the sake of telling a story, but in leadership, right? Personal branding. Amazing guest today, Kurian. Thank you very much. I know for a fact the MCC Nation, if they didn't get a lot out of this, shame on them. I personally got a lot out of this, and I'm actually going to go back to some of our leaders in our company, and I'm going to sit there and say, guys, go back and listen to this, because I'm sitting here in my head and I'm thinking to myself, man, when we used to have part of our selling process, I can hear the stories that we used to tell and the origin stories we used to tell in it. And as a company grows, and I think this is an important part, some of that can lose as you grow, right? You can lose some of those. And so those are origin stories that come and go, and that are so important that get people emotionally involved. And so I want us to go back. I'm going to have my own companies go back and kind of listen to this episode and then assess what we do. So, not only is this helping my audience with Move, Crush, Out, I think it's going to help us as well. So thank you very much.
That's fantastic. Listen, and check out the book, Scott. It's on Amazon. The Kindle version is only $3.49.
It is the 7 essential stories charismatic leaders tell. Go on Amazon, get that now. Where can we find you? Where can the audience find you?
You come to my site, strategypeak.com. That's my consulting website. But on the right-hand side, here's some freebies for you. You can download a couple of chapters of the book and a full infographic with all 7 stories and an example.
All right, let me just see here.
Strategypeak.com.
Is that it?
That's it. Strategy.
We are scrolling strategypeak.com.
Yeah, just go down to the right-hand column and you'll find everything right there.
And we will also put in our show notes when this drops as a podcast, we'll make sure that to put the link to the Amazon book there and as well as your website. So we'll get all that in there. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to visit movecrushcount.com and subscribe. So that way you can catch up on all our previous episodes. You never miss a future one. Subscribing does that. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram. Join our Facebook group. Kurian, please join the Facebook group in case there's some questions in there that you could help answer or comment on. And make sure you tune into all our live events when we have them with LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Stay connected with the community. Also, a special thank you to our sponsor, J&L Marketing, for their continued support. Check out their website at jnlmarketing.com so you can see how they can help you move the crowd, crush the competition, and count the money. We value your support and feedback. Please rate the show. We don't spend anything to promote it, so it's all organic growth. So rate us, review us, and when you review us, we pay attention to that, so tell us how we can improve. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll be back again soon with more valuable insights on Move, Crush, Count.
Thanks for having me on.